The night my wife called me broke didn't start with a fight. It started with the smell of lemon cleaner and a real estate brochure. Paige was wiping the same spot on our tiny granite island when I walked in from a 12-hour sprint at the office I'd borrowed, 2 desks over a pretzel shop, 4 months into a product no city had officially bought yet. I said, "Hey," soft, because the air in our condo had felt breakable lately. She didn't look up. There was a glossy pamphlet on the counter. Crescent Wharf Residences. Page corners bent where she'd been flipping. On top of it sat her phone, face down, screen lighting with notifications she never let me see anymore. "I brought Thai," I offered. "Penang and those spring rolls you—" "Leave it," she said, still wiping. "We need to talk." I'd heard that sentence 3 times in our marriage. The loan approval, Mom's biopsy coming back clean, my offer from a bigger firm after I'd cleared the CPA. I braced for anything but what came next. "I can't do this, Noah." She set the rag down, finally meeting my eyes. Her mascara was perfect. Her hair was perfect. The little diamond studs I'd bought our first Christmas together were in. She looked like someone posing in a better life. "I can't keep living like this." "Like what?" My voice came out smaller than I intended. I looked past her. The couch we'd rescued off Facebook Marketplace, the framed map of Seattle I'd insisted on, the ficus she watered like a child. The life we'd built in 1-bedroom square footage and late bill payments, and a plan I genuinely believed would pay off. Like a roommate with a man who keeps promising next year, next quarter, next funding round. She tapped the brochure. "Do you know what stability looks like? It looks like not having to check the account before buying detergent." I opened my mouth and then shut it. I had explanations. The RFP that was down to us and one competitor. The deputy city manager who'd said, "We want your platform. We just have to run procurement." The quiet, careful angel check I'd turned down because it came with a board seat I couldn't live with. None of it would land. "This is how it is before it breaks open," I tried, gentle. "The contract's coming. We're weeks away. Civic Glass works. You've seen it. Permit review time down 30% in pilot. Inspectors closing cases in the field." Her laugh landed like a slap. "You're pitching me in our kitchen?" She stepped closer. I could smell the lemon cleaner, the perfume she wore to important meetings, something like smoke. "Look me in the eye and tell me you have more than $400 in that joint account right now." I didn't. The condo payment would hit tomorrow. So would the light bill. I started to say, I can move money from the business savings, just for a week, and stopped because that had become a habit I hated. She looked past me toward the door. "Evan says—" She cut herself off. The name hung between us anyway. "Evan," I repeated. My mouth went dry. I'd met him once at a friend's birthday dinner. He'd ordered a $110 cab like it was water and told me, unprompted, how to structure a trust for when you have real money. He showed me what a plan looks like, she said, gesturing toward the brochure. "I'm 32, Noah. I want a family. I want to know we're not one broken laptop away from disaster. I want a man who can take care of things. I am taking care of things. I'm building—" "You're building castles with deck chairs for walls." She reached under the island and slid out a manila envelope. The weight in my chest shifted and dropped. "I talked to a lawyer." I stared at it. The paper was thick. The font was clinical. Petition for dissolution of marriage. There was a yellow sticky note on top. "I'm sorry." "P, I won't fight you for the car," she said quickly, like rehearsed kindness. "You can keep your company. I don't want that. I just want out. I can't start my real life while babysitting your gamble. I don't remember the exact moment the humiliation burned into something steady. Maybe it was when she called the thing I'd poured 2 years into a gamble. Maybe it was when she added softer, "You're a good man, Noah. You're just not enough." Maybe it was the way she didn't step closer when my hands started shaking, like emotion was contagious. "What about the vows?" I said, not angry, just tired. "Sickness and health, debt and—" "Don't do that." Her jaw set. "Don't make me the villain for wanting food in the fridge." She looked down at the envelope and then back at me. "Evan he has a place, just until I find my own." It wasn't the cheating itself, if that's what you want to call it. It was the fact that my worst day had been scheduled in someone else's calendar. I picked up the envelope. It felt heavier than it had any right to be. "You want me out tonight, or—" She exhaled. Relief, maybe. "I think that's best." I packed fast, badly. Jeans, laptop, a shaving kit, the box with my grandfather's watch. I took the framed photo of us on the Bainbridge ferry, then set it down again. At the door, she said, "I hope you get what you want, Noah." "I will," I said, and was surprised to hear how certain it sounded. "I just wish you'd wanted it with me." On the street, the air smelled like cold rain and cinnamon from the pretzel shop downstairs. I stood by my car and watched our window light go out. Somewhere above me, in a life I'd paid for with nights and weekends and compromise, my wife was texting another man goodnight. I got in, started the engine, and drove toward the only couch I knew I could borrow without asking questions. I crashed on my friend Maya's couch, the one that sagged at the middle like it had decided to give up in sympathy. She and I had met on a planning board subcommittee back when Civic Glass was a slide deck and a half-broken demo. She was the only person who'd looked at my napkin sketches of drag-and-drop zoning layers and said, "This is ugly, and cities will love it." She handed me a blanket and a mug that wasn't quite coffee and wasn't quite tea. "So," she said, "you want sympathy or plan?" "Both," I said, meaning it, and took a sip of whatever was in the mug. Maybe in reverse. She listened. Maya is good at that. She'll let you empty out every drawer in your head, and then she'll pick up the one thing worth keeping. I told her about the lemon cleaner smell and the manila envelope and the name I'd said out loud once, and tried not to picture kissing my wife in the kitchen we could barely afford while she planned a better life somewhere that had valet parking. When I was done, she set the mug down like it was a gavel. "Okay," she said. "First, you are allowed to feel like someone ran a truck over your chest and then backed up. Second, this will be useful." "Useful," I repeated, because sometimes repeating a word helps it make sense. "Yes, pain clarifies. You now have exactly 2 priorities. Land the RFP and protect your runway. Everything else is background noise." "Runway is 8 weeks, I said, thinking of the spreadsheet I hadn't wanted to open that afternoon. "If the RFP stalls, we're out of options. I can't take angel money that forces a board seat while procurement is sniffing." "Then we win now." Maya stood and started pacing, hair in a bun that listed left like a ship. "We do the demo tomorrow for Tacoma. We stop pretending the pricing is a secret. We go in with a pilot discount and a clause that locks us for 3 years if we hit performance markers. We make it painful to say no." "We?" My voice cracked. She didn't work for me. She consulted sometimes and told me when my UI made sense only to people who dream in shapefiles. "We," she said, like it wasn't a question. Also, Move your personal checking to a bank that isn't linked to the business. You can't keep smudging the lines. It's killing you. I exhaled. She said I wasn't enough, May. Of course she did. Maya's eyes softened. People who can't imagine a risk paying off always talk like it's morality. You didn't gamble the rent at a casino. You built a thing that serves people who don't get served. Cities don't throw you a parade. But when your software makes a building safer or keeps a permit from bottlenecking a mom and pop, that's enough. More than enough. I slept on that couch like the couch had decided it could hold me after all. In the morning, we drove to Tacoma with a monitor that flickered and a demo database I'd rebuilt at 2 a.m. There were 8 people in the room. The deputy city manager, 2 inspectors who looked like they'd been doing this before I was born, a thin IT guy who wore his skepticism like cologne, and a woman wearing a cardigan the exact color of caution tape who ran permitting. "Show me how my staff knows what to touch first on a Monday," she said without preamble, and we were off. I love demos the way some people love skydiving. You jump and pray the canopy opens. I ran search. I filtered by risk score. I showed how an inspector could snap a photo of a broken rail, mark a violation, and see the follow-up auto-create for reinspection. I had the inspector in the corner try it. He took a picture of a chair leg and grunted when the system labeled it unstable. "Okay," he said. "That's cute. But what about the guy who lives under the stairs who's never home when we come? Can I set a 2-hour window and have it text him automatically?" Maya stepped in. "Try this," she said, and walked him through the flow we'd argued about for a week at 2 different whiteboards. He smiled into his mustache when the text sent. The deputy city manager's eyebrows moved by a millimeter, which in deputy city manager language is a standing ovation. "Pricing?" the cardigan woman said, and looked right at me like we'd both had enough fun. I didn't dance. I didn't say, "It depends." I slid the paper across the table with the pilot price if contracted by end of quarter in a bold that had cost me sleep. It was as low as I could go without bleeding out. The deputy city manager said, "We're also looking at Atlas Gov," I finished for him. "They will come in 15% above that and tell you they're the safe choice. They'll also take 9 months to configure what will stand up in 6 weeks. I know because their product manager used to be my roommate. Did you sign an NDA?" the IT guy said, sniffing like he'd caught me at something. "Not about his pace," I said. And the cardigan woman laughed, which I understood later was the moment we won. They pushed, like they're supposed to. I promised performance metrics and a termination for cause clause that looked like it had teeth. We shook hands at 10:15. At noon, the city sent a pending procurement email and a calendar invite. At 2, Maya bought us celebratory tacos and refused to let me say the word if. "Say when," she ordered. "When," I said, and the word felt like warm air. That night, when I opened my email, there was a note from Paige's lawyer with dates and boxes to check. There was also a voicemail from my mom, who never called after 9. "I made apple crisp," she said. Do you still like apple crisp? My parents had the kind of marriage that made other people uncomfortable. They'd gotten engaged with a ring my dad carved out of driftwood because that's what he could afford. And then he'd upgraded when he could. And my mother had kept both in a dish on her dresser because the driftwood meant just as much. "I still like apple crisp," I told the empty room, and started filling in boxes I hadn't wanted to see with a steadier hand than I expected. We filed. I told the court she could have the condo, and she told the court I could keep the company she'd called a babysitting job. It felt antiseptic and also like bleeding. The last item in the email thread was a friendly heads up from her lawyer that Paige would be having mail forwarded from our address for a while because she's moving soon. Moving where? I typed and deleted, because it was the one question I didn't deserve an answer to anymore. The city signed the week my divorce finalized. I was in a courthouse that smelled like dust and paper clips when the deputy city manager texted, "We're funded. Can you meet Friday to kick off?" I took a breath that didn't hurt and typed, "Absolutely." We moved fast. The inspectors came to love the phone app like a pet. The back office staff loved how complaints didn't evaporate into voicemail purgatory. The council members loved that average permit time ticked down by double digits. Maya took a half-time equity grant, and then a full-time salary we could afford by month 3. My bank account crept out of the red like a sunburn fading. I kept waiting to miss Paige in the way that knocks the breath out of you on a Tuesday. The truth is, I missed a memory. Sunday mornings with the big mug, her toes tucked under my thigh while I read API documentation and pretended she found me interesting. The woman who'd said, "I want a family," and meant a mortgage we could laugh about 20 years later. I learned to hold that missing with 2 hands and not let it turn into a story about my worth. By summer, Civic Glass was in 4 cities. By fall, 7. We built a small-town plan for places with 2 inspectors and a city clerk who did 10 jobs. We priced it like a human being had to pay it. Word spread the way it does when you actually help someone who has no ad budget to tell anyone. I didn't post on LinkedIn about crushing it. I didn't rent a Ferrari for a day like a walking midlife crisis. I moved out of Maya's and into a place with a 2nd bedroom that I told myself was for guests and told my mother was for someday. I bought a couch that didn't sag. Sometimes, late, I took cash. The mutt I adopted because his shelter card said, "Good with anxious people," to the pier and watched the ferries come and go and let the air salt the parts of me that still stung. On a Tuesday in October, an envelope arrived without a return address. Inside was a cream card with gold script. The weight was familiar. I read it twice without understanding that my eyes had finished the words. "You are cordially invited to celebrate the union of Paige Ellis and Evan Carter, Saturday, December 3rd, Marigold Hall at Crescent Wharf. Formal attire requested." I stared at my sink until the granite blurred. "Formal attire," I said to Cash, who wagged because my tone sounded in the neighborhood of excited. I checked the postmark. It had been sent 2 weeks ago. There was a sticky note tucked in the corner, written in her handwriting. No hard feelings. We moved on. You should too. Some stories make you the villain so someone else can sleep. I set the invitation on the counter and opened my laptop to answer a vendor email. I couldn't get through a sentence. I walked the pier and got soaked in a rain that didn't care. I came back and made eggs I didn't want. I slept on the couch even though the bed was 10 feet away. In the morning, over coffee, I Googled Marigold Hall. It was the one with the vaulted timber beams and the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out at boats you needed waitlists to buy. I knew it from weddings my clients had held in years I couldn't afford a gift more expensive than a card. It belonged to Crescent Hospitality Group, a network of venues and boutique hotels owned by a family whose patriarch had built an empire on timing and charm. I'm not proud of what happened next, but I'm not ashamed of it either. I clicked into the state corporate registry. Crescent Hospitality Group was in good standing. Marigold Hall at Crescent Wharf was a subsidiary LLC. I pulled the filings. I pulled the UCCs. I picked up the phone and called the title company. The voice on the other end belonged to a woman named Renee, who sounded like she'd been doing this since faxes were new. "You're not going to get me on a conflict, are you?" she teased when I introduced myself. "What do you need that isn't technically my job?" "Public records," I said. "The deed of trust, the note holder." Why? She asked it without malice. People who guard paper begin to love the reasons people ask for it. Because I'm not 22 anymore. I surprised myself. Because sometimes the only way out of being called broke is to win your way to a different word. Because I got a wedding invitation, I need to return to sender. She laughed, low. You called the right woman. 10 minutes later, I had what I needed. Marigold Hall carried a note that had ballooned last spring. The bank that originated it had sold the paper to a smaller private lender when rates did what they do. The private lender's filings included due on transfer language and covenants that read like steel. Why do people sign these? I asked. Because they're tired and they think next season will be easier, she said. And that landed. I called the private lender. They were exactly who I thought they'd be. Men who wore their haircuts like armor, and a woman named Tessa who didn't bother with armor because she could see through you in under a minute. We're not in the business of bleeding hospitality owners, she said, when I told her I was calling about Marigold. But we don't lose money. What if I could take the risk off your books? I asked, and gave her 3 numbers. The amount they were owed, the discount that would make me their favorite email, and the timeline. Who are you? She asked, curiosity warming her tone. Harbor 12 Holdings, I said, which is what you call an LLC when you want it to sound like a boat and a bank at once. Send proof of funds, she said, and be ready to move fast. The seller's 65 and tired. He'll want out if I make it sound like a nap. I wired what I'd saved by saying no to angel money that tasted like strings. I signed papers that made my hand cramp. I took on responsibility for a building I had no business running, and a staff that would have Christmas in 8 weeks if I didn't ruin it. When the note transferred, I drove to Crescent Wharf and walked into Marigold Hall like a man trying on a sweater he wasn't sure he deserved. The place was more beautiful up close. Cedar beams that had been oiled like a ritual, a floor the color of coffee, light that made everyone look 10% kinder. At the manager's desk sat a woman in her 50s named Lorraine, with a pen stuck in her bun and a calendar that looked like a war plan. We don't have availability until March, she said without looking up. I'm not here to book, I said. I'm here to introduce myself. I'm Noah. She blinked, and then blinked again. Introduce yourself like, you're the groom? If you are, you should tell me your name now, because your fiancé will never forgive me if... I'm the note holder, I said gently. Harbor 12. We just took assignment from the lender. Lorraine went very still. Are you here to shut me down? She asked. And her voice did something I recognized. It sounded like the week I'd had $4 in an account and 2 vendors to pay. No, I said, and meant it. I'm here to keep you open, and I need your help with something I intend to handle. Carefully. She looked at me for a long beat. Carefully, she repeated. You look like a man who went through a divorce and chose a legal remedy instead of a hobby. That's uncomfortably accurate, I admitted. Come on, she said, standing. I'll show you where the light switches talk to the audio system like a married couple. Then you can tell me why the title company called me ma'am in a tone like a curtain closing. Lorraine led me through rooms I'd only seen in tagged photos. Bridal suites with velvet chairs, a bar that gleamed like a piano lid. Storage closets that smelled like eucalyptus and logistics. In the back, a corkboard held vendor cards pinned with dental precision. My staff stays, she said before I asked. If you're here to streamline, consider streamlining your exit. They stay, I said, with retention bonuses when we hit year-end cash targets. She exhaled. Then I'm listening. We sat in her office. which was a glorified closet with a view of a dumpster that somehow didn't smell. I told her about the invitation and said the word Paige without flinching. I told her I had no intention of ruining a staff's December because I wanted closure. I told her I did want control over one thing: whether the wedding that had been addressed to Noah plus guest happened in my building without my consent. Consent? Lorraine arched an eyebrow. That's a strong word. So is broke, I said, and then softened it. Look, I won't humiliate anyone. Not your team, not vendors, not guests. If the event proceeds, it will be because I allow it. And if it doesn't, I won't leave you holding a PR bag that bursts. What do you have in mind? She asked warily. There's a clause in the contract, I said, and slid a copy across. Force majeure covers things like earthquakes and pandemics. There's also a management discretion clause, rarely used, but there, allowing closure for urgent repairs to protect safety. I pointed to the paragraph a lawyer named Julian had highlighted at midnight. It's legal. It's also a hammer. I don't want to swing it unless I have to. Unless, she repeated, because Lorraine liked to hear the parts you hadn't said. Unless they treat your team the way Paige treated me, I said simply. Vendors stiffed, staff snapped at, entitlement that wastes hours you can't afford. If they do that, we close for repairs, refund what you've already been paid plus 10%. And I book a holiday market in here the day after with every small business in a 10-mile radius, free. Her mouth twitched. A man with a plan and a conscience. I'll admit those don't always walk in together. I also want to pay the florist and the band and anyone else net 30, regardless, I said. I don't want December to hurt people who didn't ask to be in my story. Lorraine studied me. You talk like a man who knows what a net 30 feels like when it stretches to 60. She turned to her computer and pulled up the event ledger. They paid the deposit. The balance is due the week before. They've added a chocolate fountain I didn't encourage. The groom tried to slip me a check under the table for priority attention, and I told him my attention comes standard. My stomach tightened. He slipped you. It happens, she said, like discussing rain. I slipped it back. I stood. If you see anything I need to know before the week of, call me. If you don't, I'll show up the night before and make a decision. Lorraine tipped her head. You're really considering letting it go on. Not if I can't stomach it. But if I can, the best revenge might be a good party they owe me for. She barked a laugh. Spoken like a person who's had therapy. 3 sessions, I admitted, and 3 canceled because procurement called, which my therapist said counts as avoidance. We shook on terms. I left with a keycard that said owner on the back in a font that felt like a joke and a staff schedule for the next 6 weekends. At home, I took cash to the pier and told him I'd bought a wedding venue because my ex-wife called me broke. Cash licked my hand and then tried to eat a discarded napkin. The week slid toward December like a train you can't slow. We onboarded a new city. I went to my mom's and fixed the cabinet hinge she'd been nagging me about for too long. She made apple crisp and asked gentle questions with the force of an MRI. Are you okay? She said, when I told her about the invitation. I don't need you to be brave. I need you to be honest. I'm angry, I said, and I'm excited. Excited? Her eyebrow did the thing mine does when I pretend to be fine, at the life that's showing up. I nodded toward my car, still smelling faintly of pretzel shop. At a second bedroom that might not be a museum forever. At Christmas without a knot in my throat. She reached across the table, took my hand, and squeezed. Your father would be proud of the man who pays the florist, even if the bride doesn't deserve centerpieces. Thanks, Mom, I said, and took a fork to the crisp like it had done something to me personally. 2 days before December 3rd, Lorraine called. You should know 2 things, she said, efficient like always. 1. The groom's planner tried to clarify that our staff would accept cash bonuses for small favors, like letting the videographer fly a drone indoors. I said no. He didn't love that. 2. The bride's mother called to ask whether the owner intended to be respectful of her daughter's special day. My voice found an even place. What did you say? I said the owner is a class act, which is what you told me to be able to say. Thanks, I said softly. Are you canceling? Lorraine asked, the word careful. I'm coming tonight at 8, I said. If the room feels survivable, it stands. If it doesn't, we close for urgent repairs, and I hand you a script that makes me the villain with a checkbook. Copy, she said. I'll tell maintenance to work loudly in the background in case you need dramatic B-roll. At 7:59, I stood outside Marigold Hall with my keycard in my pocket and a knot in my stomach I could braid into a rope. The sky had that winter blue that looks like glass. Light spilled out of the big windows like warmth. Inside, a band tested strings. Staff in black moved like competence. Lorraine met me at the door. They're here doing a walkthrough with their planner, she said. If you proceed, it will be a perfect wedding. If you cancel, it will be a headline. I don't want a headline, I said. I want a memory that belongs to me. Then let's go make one, she said, and led me toward the arch where 24 white roses were trying their best. I saw Paige across the room like a scene I hadn't ordered. Her hair was pulled back in that way that made her look like she'd just stepped out of a commercial for a car I'd never buy. She was laughing at something the planner said. Evan stood beside her with his hand at the small of her back, like he was entitled to touch the spine I'd memorized. A staffer at the bar caught my eye and smiled because she thought I was a groom coming to approve the ice cubes. Ready? Lorraine murmured. Ready, I said, and felt the word settle like a coin at the bottom of a fountain. The planner was the type who pronounced schedule with 3 syllables. She had an earpiece and a binder with tabs labeled in calligraphy. We're going to do lanterns, she was saying to the lighting tech. Not too Pinterest, not too moody. Think heirloom magazine, but with a sense of joy. Lorraine cleared her throat. Mr. Carter, she said, addressing the groom first, because she had a sense for where to aim grace when it would sting most. This is Noah. He's with ownership. Evan turned, smile automatic. Fantastic, he said, extending a hand like a politician. Appreciate you making this so streamlined. We've had some hiccups with the band, but we're back on track. I shook his hand and then looked at Paige. She stared at me like I was a person she'd seen once in an airport. My heart did something stupid and adolescent, and then I told it to stand down. Noah, she said finally, like my name was a dare. I didn't realize you were involved in hospitality. I wasn't, I said. Then I learned. Her mouth opened and closed, a fish flipping back into water. The planner glanced between us, sensing a story and pretending not to. Evan's smile lost wattage by a lumen. Is there, he began, and I held up a hand. This is simple, I said. I'm here to check a box that lets me sleep tonight. Lorraine will run your wedding with the care she runs every event. If you or your guests treat her staff with anything less than dignity, I have the legal right to close for urgent repairs. I will exercise it. If you don't, the bar will be stocked, the band will be paid, and at the end of the night, you'll leave with photos and a bill marked paid in full. The planner blinked. Paige flushed. Evan's jaw clenched in the way men's jaws clench when a variable they hadn't accounted for arrives in a pressed shirt. Are we being threatened? Paige's mother appeared, drawn by the scent of conflict. She wore a dress that probably had its own publicist and a necklace you insure separately. You're being informed, Lorraine said, saving me from a sentence I might regret. It's standard when a building changes hands. Ownership changed hands, the mother said, turning to Paige with a hiss. Why wasn't I told? It happened this week, I said evenly. Most guests won't notice, which is the point. Evan recovered his smile. We'll treat your staff like family, he said, patting my shoulder as if that earned him points. I come from hospitality stock. My uncle owned a chain of... Then you know what cash bonuses do to a culture, Lorraine said sweetly. We pass on that here. He withdrew his hand. Of course. I almost walked away. In another life, I do. But there's a part of healing that requires your body to witness you doing something kinder than your worst impulse. One more thing, I said. Paige's eyes flicked up, braced. I paid your florist ahead, I said, keeping my voice level. And the band. December can be tight. I didn't want them waiting on a wire. Paige's mother bristled. We can pay our vendors. I'm sure you can, I said. Consider it my holiday card. Paige looked at me, and for a breath I saw the girl on the ferry we'd been with hair in her face and wind making her laugh. Then it was gone. She nodded. Okay, she said quietly. Thank you. Lorraine put a hand on my elbow. Let's let them rehearse, she murmured, and guided me away like a bouncer with manners. In the lobby, my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. Mr. Miller? A woman's voice asked. Yes. This is Cassandra from Pacific Financial. I'm calling regarding Mr. Evan Carter's account. We've been trying to reach him about a flagged wire. His phone goes to voicemail. He listed you as a professional reference. I stared at the gold veining in the lobby tile until it stopped trying to move. Paige had written, "No hard feelings," and here was a banker calling me from the other man's mess. I'm not his colleague, I said. What's the issue? I can't share details, she said, apologetic. But if you see him, tell him we need to verify the source of funds for a large transfer. Copy, I said, and hung up. I stood there, listening to the band drift into the hallway with a cover of a song I used to like, and waited for anger to rise. It didn't. Something like pity did. Everything okay? Lorraine asked. Everything is everything, I said, which is a sentence my therapist would call progress adjacent. We walked the perimeter. I touched the cedar like it might bless me. I signed a stack of papers the lawyer had sent, initialed where the force majeure clause lived, and wrote an email to myself I'd never send to anyone else. You are allowed to be both hurt and proud. You are allowed to own a thing you bought for the wrong reason and run it for the right ones. When I stepped outside, the sky had cleared like the city had decided to grant me a view on purpose. I drove home with the radio off. Cash curled up on the back seat like a question mark. At my place, on the stoop, a figure stepped from the shadows. For a flash I thought it was Evan, and my blood did what blood does when it thinks it's about to need to sprint. It wasn't. It was Paige. She had her coat wrapped tight and her hair in a knot I used to associate with Sunday chores. Her face looked less like a commercial and more like a person who had been alive all day. I shouldn't be here, she said, not dramatic, just true. You shouldn't, I agreed. I heard you own Marigold. She said it like she didn't believe sentences had the right to contain those words. Did you do that because of me? Yes, I said. Because at some point you stopped sandpapering the truth. And because of who I was when you left. And because I needed to prove something to a version of myself who slept on a couch and thought humiliation was a full-time job. She swallowed. Evan, She stopped. People who live inside a story don't have the words to summarize it. A banker called me, I said, watching her mouth twitch. I suspect I'm not the only person who will. She looked at the concrete, then up. Are you going to cancel it? Not if I can help it. She pulled in a breath that shook. Why? Because I liked the version of me that paid the band. I leaned against the railing. And because I won't hand you an excuse you can use to blame me for a day you planned without me. Her eyes filled. She blinked hard. You were always kind, she said, like it was an accusation she'd decided to forgive. I wasn't kind enough back. I didn't tell her about the mango stick rice habit I'd given up to keep the lights on, or the way the pretzel shop below my first office had become a clock for my days. I didn't tell her about the nights I'd held my breath and counted to 30 before answering an email because it felt like the difference between making payroll and not. I said, take care of yourself, and meant it, and watched her nod like a student being dismissed from a class she didn't register for. When she left, I went upstairs and stood in my kitchen without lemon cleaner. Cash wagged like the day had ended well. I made pasta and oversalted it and ate it anyway, feeling every grain. The night before, I slept like a man who had let go of the heaviest rock, even if he wasn't sure where it would land. Wedding day. I wore a suit I'd bought secondhand and tailored so it looked like it belonged to me. Cash watched me tie my tie with the interest of a sports commentator. Guard the house, I told him, and he thumped his tail like he'd just been promoted. Marigold Hall looked like a postcard. The florist had done something with wintergreens and white roses that made the air smell like a better world. The staff moved with the practiced choreography of holiday season. Lorraine gave me a nod that said, "Don't make me regret believing you." At 3, the planners' people started arriving with boxes labeled in cursive. At 4, a photographer in suspenders took photos of empty chairs. At 5, the first guests trickled in. Men checking their watches. Women who could glide in heels like physics loved them. I stationed myself at the edge of the lobby where the light made shadows flattering and tried to be furniture. Paige's mother swept in like a front. She nodded at me as if we were heads of state who'd agreed on a ceasefire. Evan shook hands with a man who looked like money had walked out of his closet and asked to borrow a blazer. "Gorgeous room," someone said behind me. I turned. A woman stood there in a dress the color of late cherries, hair in a bob that looked too easy to be easy. "Do you work here?" "I own it," I said, and watched her assess that sentence like a filing clerk moving it to the right drawer. "I'm Ava," she said. "Friend of the groom." She stuck out a hand. Her ring finger was bare, but there were tan lines where something had lived. "It's a beautiful venue." "Thanks," I said, and then couldn't resist. "How do you know Evan?" She smiled like a person who was careful. "We met through a client," she said. "He's been helping me move some assets." She looked past me, toward the set of double doors where the ceremony would be. "He told me I'd love this place." "He has good taste," I said, and the words felt like testing a tripwire. She tilted her head. "Do you know the bride?" "In a past life," I said. "Ah," she said. "One of those. I'm sorry." "Me too," I said. "Less than before." She nodded, approving, like I'd passed an exam I hadn't studied for. "Well, Break a leg, I guess, or whatever you say to venue owners. She moved off toward a cluster of guests near the bar. Lorraine appeared at my elbow. "Your florist is crying happy tears because the light is good," she said. "Does that man in the navy suit know he left his cufflinks in the restroom? And I've been staring at the groom's friend in the cherry dress, wondering if she's a cousin or a complication." "Complication," I said quietly. "But perhaps not ours." The ceremony started at 6 on the dot. The band shifted into a string rendition of a pop song that spelled money to people who didn't want to say it. The planner did her finger twirl that meant, "Go." The officiant, a man who looked like he comforted people for a living, took his place under an arch that now resembled a well-funded garden. Evan walked out smiling like a man in a magazine about men who smile. The bridesmaids floated. Paige appeared, and for a second the air left my lungs anyway, because memory is a terrible actor who doesn't know when to leave the stage. She didn't look at me. Why would she? She walked toward a man who had a plan for her, and I stood in a building I had bought because I had a plan for me. "Friends," the officiant began, and I stopped listening, because the thing I needed from this moment wasn't in words. I watched Lorraine cue a lighting shift, perfect enough to make the string players look like a film. I watched a server kneel to pick up a dropped program like a stagehand in an invisible play. I watched the door to the lobby swing open, and a man in a suit I recognized march in with his jaw tight. It was the kind of jaw law enforcement officers get when they're in plain clothes for a work event. He had the look of someone who doesn't want to be there and also very much needs to be there. He spoke to the planner, who hissed, and then to Lorraine, who listened and then sent him my way like a parcel. "Mr. Miller?" he asked, quiet enough not to disturb the strings. He flashed a badge without brandishing it. "Detective Jimenez, Financial Crimes. Is there somewhere we can talk that isn't here?" In the flick of a second, I saw 3 options. 1. Take him to the office and keep this away from Paige. 2. Ask him to wait 30 minutes for vows. 3. Say, "This is not my problem," because in a very real sense, it wasn't. "Office," I said, and guided him down the side hall. Lorraine fell in step, because she likes to be in rooms where things happen. Detective Jimenez closed the door, pulled a folder, and tapped a paper with a finger that looked like it could knock on a door and change a life. "Mr. Evan Carter moved funds in a way that looks like misappropriation," he said. "We've been trying to reach him. We understand there's a wedding in 10 days. In 10 minutes, Lorraine corrected gently. He winced. Not ideal. He looked at me. "I'm not here to arrest anyone. I'm here to prevent further transfer if he intends to wire gifts tonight. He's done that before. Moved client money as if it were his to give. It is not." I thought of Cassandra from the bank. I thought of the car at our counter with a sticky note that said, "You should move on." I thought of a version of myself who would have enjoyed this moment like a dessert. "He's at the altar," I said. "Give me 5 minutes to get him to the office under a pretext. We'll keep this quiet." Lorraine stared at me like I'd just shown her a new species of kindness. "You're sure?" "I paid the band," I said. "I can help the detective prevent a felony without making the bride's grandmother cry." We moved like a pit crew. Lorraine signaled the band at a cue she never uses, the "we have a photo issue" tempo shift. The planner looked confused but obedient. I whispered to an usher and sent him to the officiant. He leaned in and murmured something about a legal form that needed the groom's signature. Now, by code. Which is the kind of lie that saves more than it harms. Evan ducked out with a frown. I met him at the side door. "Contract hiccup," I said. and got him down the hall before he could ask a question. Detective Jimenez shut the office door behind us and put on the voice cops use when they are being reasonable, because they already know they have you. "Mr. Carter," he said, "we need to talk about 3 wires and a promise you made to a client named Ava Beale." Evan's face changed in increments. Confusion to irritation, to calculation, to something a little like fear. "This is wildly inappropriate," he said. "I'm getting married." "Congratulations," the detective said. "Do you intend to initiate any transfers tonight?" Evan swallowed. "What is this about?" He looked at me. "Is this your doing?" "I'm here to keep you from making it worse," I said, truth built like a bridge. He paced. He pulled his phone and then thought better of it. He looked like a man trying not to sweat in a room that had decided to measure him. "I'll need counsel," he said finally, and the detective nodded, because that's what men who can afford counsel say when the word misappropriation walks into their wedding. "Then we're done for now," Jimenez said. "But you're not to move funds. A hold will hit your accounts within the hour." He slid a card across the desk. "Enjoy your evening," he added, and left, so softly I wondered if he had ever been loud. Evan stared at me. For a second, he looked like the man who told my wife she deserved certainty. Then he looked like a boy who learned money would excuse anything until it didn't. "If you think you get to be noble," he began. "I think we're done," I said, and opened the door. "Your efficient is stalling with a story about he once dropped a ring in a pond. You should go get married if that's still what's happening." He paused. "Are you going to tell her?" he asked, and I realized he meant Paige. "No," I said, and meant it. "But life will." He sneered. People without imagination do that when confronted with someone who refuses the scene they wrote for you. He straightened his jacket and walked back toward the aisle. I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes. Lorraine touched my sleeve. "You good?" "I am," I said, surprising both of us. "I am, actually." The ceremony resumed, slightly looser around the edges, like a shirt that's been worn twice. The officiant finished his pond story and pivoted with admirable professionalism into vows. Paige and Evan said words millions of people say and mean in millions of ways. There was a kiss, applause, relief like a weather pattern. In the lobby, as guests spilled toward the bar, Ava in the cherry dress intercepted Evan with a smile that would have shaken a less shaken man. She touched his wrist. "We good?" she asked, light, but her eyes sharp. "Tonight isn't the night," he said through his teeth. And she laughed, low, like a card shuffling. "Every night was the night for a while," she said. And something in her voice told me it wasn't their first conversation about firsts and nights. Paige watched from 10 feet away, face carefully neutral the way women learn early to be when a room is watching. I watched the moment calculation turned to comprehension. It's a look you don't forget. It's the look I'd probably worn in our kitchen at a lemon cleaner counter. I moved toward Lorraine. "Keep the bar pouring," I said. "No one leaves because 2 people forgot what honesty sounds like." She squeezed my arm like a coach congratulating a runner on not tripping when the hurdle came early. The band struck up a song that told everyone their feet knew what to do. Guests scattered to corners that made them feel safe. Paige's mother rabbit-punched air with her mouth, whispering at a bridesmaid who did not deserve to be whispered at. Evan did a lap shaking hands like he was running for a position none of us would vote for. Ava took a champagne and leaned against a pillar like a woman who wasn't surprised to find herself in a room where she asked for the truth and got a mirror instead. I slipped out to the balcony that faced the water. The December air snapped crisp. Below, Boats bob the way they do when they can't control anything but can still try. I took a breath that tasted like endings. Footsteps sounded behind me. Paige stepped out, alone. "How do you do it?" she asked, not looking at me. "Walk around like you didn't swallow a grenade and smile at the people who handed you the pin?" "Practice," I said. "And a dog." She huffed something that wanted to be a laugh and didn't make it. "Did you know?" she asked, finally turning to face me. "About her?" "No," I said, which was true. "But he received a visit from a detective. For your sake, I kept it quiet." I watched the words land. "I think you know what to do next." Tears came, quick and hard like winter rain. She wiped them with her thumb and hated herself for it. "I married a plan," she said, voice small. I thought, if the plan had numbers, it would hold. "Some plans do," I said. "Mine just happened to be written in code and paper plates." She sniffed. "I'm sorry I didn't believe in yours." "I'm okay," I said, and realized I meant that too. "I wish you'd left kinder. I wish I'd explained better. I wish a lot of things. But I don't wish I wasn't me." She nodded, like a verdict had been read. "I need to tell my mom to stop talking before I throw her in the sound," she said. And I let out a laugh that surprised us both. She put a hand on the balcony rail and steadied herself. "Thank you for letting the wedding happen." "You're welcome," I said. "Don't give me credit for your choices." She wiped her face, squared her shoulders, and walked back into a room that would no longer be a reception so much as a reconciliation with facts. Inside, Lorraine was running interference with the grace of a traffic engineer. She'd moved the timeline, cut a toast, slid the father-daughter dance forward, and found the aunt who could make 3 tables laugh. The band played the one song every generation agrees on. People danced, partly because they wanted to, and partly because motion can be a prayer. I posted at the bar and tipped until the bartender told me I was not allowed to adopt him. He asked, "You okay?" And I said, "On average." And he gave me a soda without judgment. Around 8, a woman in a pantsuit that meant business approached with a clipboard and a tone. "Who's the owner?" she asked the bartender, who pointed at me traitorously. "Hi," she said briskly. "I'm Sandy, from the department. We had a complaint about drones." "No drones," I said. "Try the neighbor who always calls when music sounds like joy." She cracked a smile. "You know him too?" We compared notes about the man who liked nothing. Sandy took a look around and softened. "Beautifully run event," she said. "We don't see many." "That's Lorraine," I said. "If I had a key to the city, I'd give her the spare." The rest of the night unfolded like a movie whose editor knew when to cut. There were hugs like apologies and smiles like bandages. Evan made a short speech about family that contained fewer lies than average. Paige danced with a cousin while a grandmother clapped on 2 and 4. Ava slipped out without drama, which told me she'd learned more about her standards than his promises. At 10, the dessert cart rolled with tiny things that looked like magic and tasted like butter. At 11, the photo booth printed photos of people trying to look like they weren't thinking about anything important. At midnight, the lights came up like a mercy. Guests drifted into the night with favors they'd forget in back seats and feelings they'd remember in uneven waves. Lorraine leaned against the manager's desk and exhaled. "One for the books," she said. "You did good." "You did," I said, "because leadership is mostly giving credit to the person who actually kept the floor from catching fire. We cut checks. We hugged staff with our eyes because we pay them money instead of making them accept affection." I walked out into air that had gone colder and cleaner. On my windshield under the wiper was an envelope. I knew the handwriting even before I tugged it free. Inside was a note on the back of a place card that said, Paige plus Evan. The message was 4 words. You were enough. I stood there while the city breathed and let that sentence do whatever it needed to do inside me. I didn't text back because the future doesn't live in replies to the past. I put the note in my coat pocket like a coin. On the drive home, the radio played a song that had been ours once. I didn't turn it off. It ended. Another began. That one was mine. The week after, life resumed in the way it always insists you remember the grocery list. I answered a support ticket from an inspector who discovered a bug in the way our calendar handled leap years. I sent a handwritten card to the florist because the scent in marigold had felt like relief. I took cash on a run that became a walk because I am not the protagonist of a sports movie. The local paper ran a feature on a seamless holiday wedding at Marigold, accompanied by photos where you wouldn't know anything had bent. A gossip site ran a blind item that could have been about 3 different financiers. No one called me noble. No one called me broke. Mostly, I got emails about whether we could build an integration with a permitting system that looked like it had been written on a typewriter. On Thursday, I met with Lorraine and the staff to talk bonuses. We did the math on the whiteboard and rounded up instead of down. You're a good owner, she said, and I filed that sentence under things I never expected to hear and would like to earn again. At home that night, I opened a fresh doc and wrote everything I wanted to say in the kitchen, and then didn't send it to anyone. I wrote I loved you hard and badly. I wrote you were right about wanting a plan, wrong about thinking money does the loving for you. I wrote I hope he treats you like a person and not a prize. I wrote I forgive you because I like the way my face looks when I do. I closed the doc and saved it under a name I wouldn't recognize if I stumbled across it in 3 years. In January, the deputy city manager from Tacoma called. We've got a problem your software made visible, he said, which is the whole point of software in government. We got on a plane and solved something with patience and coffee. In February, Maya stood in my kitchen, looked at the extra bedroom, and said, You could put a crib in there one day, you know, in the tone of a friend who believes in future verbs. In March, my mother brought me the driftwood ring. He would want you to have it, she said, meaning my dad. Not for symbolism, for reminding. You did this when there was nothing shiny. I held the ring that was smooth in places and rough in others, and thought that was a decent sentence for a life. In April, a letter arrived from the Crescent family, the ones who'd built the hospitality network. Handwritten. We heard you took care of our people, it read. If you ever want a partner who knows linens and boilers, call. I smiled and put it in the drawer with a note from Paige, because life is a drawer full of sentences you didn't plan for and learn to carry. I saw Paige once more that year. At the grocery store, aisle 4, canned tomatoes. She reached for the San Marzano the same second I did, and then we did that choreography where you both pretend the shelf is wide. We laughed softly, and then it faded. How are you? She asked. Good, I said, because I was. You? I'm learning, she said, which is all anyone has any business saying when they're not writing captions for strangers to read. We stood in that aisle for a minute, the fluorescent lights making everything a little flatter, and told each other the minimum truth. She had left the condo. She had a job she liked. She had a therapist who didn't let her get away with easy lines. I told her about Tacoma and cash and how I'd learned to cook one thing well. We did not talk about Evan. We did not need to. Take care, she said. And I thought of the note on my windshield, and the night on the balcony, and the lemon cleaner and apple crisp, and the way the light looks when it comes through cedar. "You too," I said, and meant it, and pushed my cart toward everything I hadn't known I'd want. On our first anniversary of the night, I stood in the lobby of a building I owned by accident and on purpose. I wrote a check to a shelter that always needed more. I addressed it to a program for people in the middle of leaving, because that feels like wilderness, and because wilderness is where you decide who you are. I signed it with a hand that didn't shake anymore. At Civic Glass, we pushed a release that made the app work better on older phones, because not everyone has the latest thing. At Marigold, Lorraine booked a quinceañera that brought more joy through the doors than the 3 weddings before it combined. At home, I bought a rug that tied the room together the way rugs do when a man notices he hasn't tripped on a loose corner in months. Sometimes, I still wake up with the smell of lemon cleaner in my head and feel a flash of anger like a match. I let it burn out in the air of a room I pay for without borrowing from a future I don't own yet. Then I take cash out, and he loses his mind over a bird, and the morning is just morning again. If you're waiting for a line about how buying the venue healed me, it didn't. It gave me a place to put a feeling until the feeling learned to walk out on its own. Healing came from smaller, dumber things. Answering emails kindly even when the day hurt. Remembering to eat breakfast, saying no without making it a poem. Saying yes when a friend said, "Come over and watch a movie that will not make you a better person." On a Tuesday in June, a woman at a coffee shop smiled at me, and then, 4 weeks later, held my hand while we crossed a street. She asked what I did, and I said, "I help inspectors close violations, and sometimes I own some wood and glass." And she said, "That sounds like you know how to fix the right things," which is maybe the closest thing to music my life has made in a while. I don't know if I'll ever wear the driftwood ring as anything other than a story. I don't know if Marigold will stay in my portfolio or become a line on a sheet that makes an accountant nod. I do know this. The night I was told I was broke, I wasn't. I was rich in something I hadn't learned to price yet. The ability to keep going. To be decent when decency felt expensive. To rewrite not enough into a ledger that balanced. If you're reading this and you've been told you're not enough, hear me. There is a building somewhere you'll walk into and recognize as yours, even if you bought it for the wrong reason. There is a dog who will think your tie is a toy and remind you to loosen it. There is a woman at a coffee shop who will look at you like a person, not a plan. There is a version of you who paid the band, and he is worth rooting for.